Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, February 1st. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. Continuing our position preview series, we move on to third base, which coincidentally was a position in which a star was moved over the weekend. The move is still not official, but Nolan Arenado appears to be headed to St. Louis for a pretty underwhelming return based on what we know right now. That, of course, still not totally official, but that sort of leads off the news segment of today's show. And the first question everybody has is, with Arenado, how much are we really taking away from his projection with the move out of Coors Field into a pretty pitcher-friendly environment like Busch Stadium?
Yeah, it's tough because it's also wrapped up in this shoulder injury that he had, that tanked some of his numbers. But you don't just take the away numbers. And the reason you don't do that is because Colorado hitters see vastly different pitch mixes when they're on the road because, breaking balls don't work in Colorado. So they see a ton of fastballs at home. They become fastball centric. They swing more on fastballs in the league and they do damage with it at home. Then they go on the road where the rest of the league has been trending away from the fastball for a long time, has been trending towards the breaking ball, and they just see a ton of junk. And you can even see it in Arenado's splits. The first 2 days after he leaves, excuse me, the first 2 days, oh man, where's this frog? Ah, frog! All right, there we go. I don't know what happened there. That was strange. Anyway, the first 2 days after he leaves Coors, he has like a 700 OPS for his career. And then the days after that, he climbs up to sort of an 850 type situation and higher. So I personally think he'll hit something like 275 with a 350 OBP and a 500 slugging. It's not vintage Colorado. It's definitely had some BABIP air taken out of it and some slugging, but it's also a very good player.
Yeah, and I think one player that people started to think about over the weekend was Matt Holliday. He made the same move effectively in his career, going from, of course, Colorado to St. Louis. And he didn't completely fall apart with that move. And I think if you set the expectations in the high 20s, low 30s for home runs, as opposed to high 30s, low 40s, you're on the right track. The batting average should be pretty good, if not great. I don't think it's going to be a 300 situation, but the run production should also be pretty good too. And of course, just from a pure team standpoint, this is a big boost for the Cardinals. This is good news for Paul Goldschmidt. This is good news for Tommy Edman. This is good news for the other fantasy players that we rely upon in St. Louis to have one more really good hitter in the lineup. Now, we've made it our mission on this podcast to rip apart the Rockies at every possible turn. I don't think we have to go into great detail doing that. This is pretty obviously a salary dump. Unless there are some players involved in this trade that we have not previously heard about, it looks really bad on paper. Austin Gomber, John Torres, Jake Woodford are the names that I've seen as the return. And Colorado is also sending $50 million to the Cardinals to offset some of the cost of Arenado's contract. So not only are they dumping a perennial all-star, but they're also paying some salary to have him off the books, which is just gross. But do you like any of the players? Well, I know you like Gomber. We can't really like Gomber as a pitcher in Colorado though anymore. That's pretty hopeless. But John
even
Torres,
his stuff number will go down because his curve won't have the same break.
Yeah,
but
so
he does have a top 20 stuff number among starters. So I like him. We'll see how the command works out.
All the things we've worried about, though, with Gray and Marquez and the Colorado starters over the years, now all those apply to Gomber. So the glimmer of hope for him as a late target, it's gone for the short term.
Yeah, and their pitching coaching is, their pitching coaching and pitching development is bottom shelf. I mean, they have very obvious things about four-seamers and sinkers that they haven't figured out yet. Maybe because they're so obsessed with Coors and they think that they have to play differently, but if that's the case, then they should have a bunch of sinker guys, and they don't. They have a bunch of four-seam guys, and they're telling them to throw low in the zone. It's just a weird combo. And so I don't have the most confidence that they will get the most out of him in Gomber. So yeah, it's just a really poor thing. I went from being super happy to have him among my keepers in a 28 keeper dynasty to I don't think I'm keeping him.
I don't think you need to keep him in a 20-team dynasty. Really unfortunate for him. But the guy that kind of wins in this trade from a prospect perspective is probably John Torres. He was acquired by the Cardinals as part of the Oscar Mercado deal with Cleveland, and we haven't seen him play above low A. The time he spent in low A was just 21 games in 2019. Of course, he's among the many prospects who didn't play competitive games anywhere during the 2020 season. So he'll probably go to the Midwest League or stay in low A to begin his time in Colorado. I guess with all the shuffling around, might not be the Midwest League anymore, but he's interesting because he's toolsy, and he might be the kind of guy that if the hit tool comes around several years from now, we're talking about him as, you know, one of the ways this trade eventually bore some fruit for the Rockies.
Yeah. You'd hope that by including the 50 million that they would have gotten somebody like Gorman.
Nolan Gorman would have been a good target. Yep.
Nolan Gorman. Or since they, feel like they may need to acquire pitching through trades rather than and drafting rather than free agency, because only relievers have signed there. Matthew Liberatore, you would have thought would have been a large sort of get for them, and they didn't. So I don't know. Torres looks good, but the strikeout rate is up and down. It would be so much better if we just knew what his strikeout rate was this year. And I don't even know how good, even if you could trust the other team to tell you the right strikeout rate, I don't even know how valuable a strikeout rate is if it's accrued facing only the same pitchers all year that are on your team.
Yeah, so, I mean, if it's Torres and he's facing some guys who are a little older, maybe because of the way alternate site stuff was working.
That's true.
Maybe it's okay, but this is not a good haul. And I think, as you pointed out, since you're throwing $50 million back to help cover costs, you should be getting a top prospect back. I mean, even in the small deal that the Orioles and Angels made where Alex Cobb was sent to Anaheim, Jahmai Jones was the prospect going back the other way. At least to get a prospect, a fringe top 100 guy, do something. Like, do something smart. Do something that makes sense. But we can't do it. We can't have Colorado making decisions like that.
For Colorado in a team building or rebuilding type situation, trading German Marquez is the move because you get the most for him probably. Trading Arenado to free up cash to try and sign Story is like,
robbing Peter to then punch Paul for no reason.
Right. And do you think Story is going to see what just happened and be like, oh yeah, yes, please I'm going to sign on the dotted line. So I think the likelihood that Story signs is very low, unless they blow him out of the water with another big deal right after the last big deal went poorly. I mean,
no chance.
I don't think so. And so trading German Marquez would have been the move. That's what the market is doing right these days. The market is saying that, teams' years of control, that's what they value. I don't know. I like this so much from the Cardinals aspect that I was thinking about, like, what about salary dumps being a bit of a weakness in the market where maybe it's a good idea instead of buying a free agent to sort of buy a free agent this way. Because they're about to get, I did the math and it looks like, everything still has to be reported. It's not all, finalized, but if the 50 million and the extra 15 million and all that stuff, if all that stuff is true, the extra year of 15 million that they're saying Arenado is going to get, if all that stuff is true, I think they basically get Arenado for $23 million a year. And there's no way that they would have gotten a player of Arenado's quality with $23 million a year.
Right. If you look at recent players to get 23 million on the open market, you're getting into like the Zach Wheeler territory and Patrick Corbin, JT Realmuto. And I would say Arenado is a cut above those players. As good as those players all are, that's a really nice bargain. He has the kind of skill set that should age really well. Premium defender, should become at least an average defender as he loses some skills defensively. The way he makes a lot of contact, the power is not just the product of the ballpark. All those things point to a player who will still be good at the end of his time, still be a regular, still be an above average regular, maybe a 2.5, 3-win sort of player in those end years of the deal. And that's fine. You're not hurting yourself at $23 million a year with a player like that. So got to tip the cap to the Cardinals as much as I don't want to, because they took advantage of an opportunity that doesn't come around that often.
Here's the last caveat, though, that I have on this is, Matt Swartz found a while ago that, and I think it's still true, but we'd have to retest it to say it's lock solid. But he found that players that sign with their original team, that re-sign, do better than players that sign on the open market. And I think the theory behind that was that those teams know that player best. They know their own players best. And if they're letting them go, it's because they've been watching the medicals, or they know something about their character or their makeup. They know stuff that other teams wouldn't know, that maybe scouts couldn't even catch, because they've been in the clubhouse with them. They've had the negotiations with them. They know how things go. So if that's true, then the player dump, of the salary dump like this, would be like another level. Like, you would expect those players maybe not to do so well, because the team had looked at everything and was like, nah. So I wanted to say, oh yeah, the Yu Darvish thing, great. That was a great one. And this one should work out as well. But then I was also thinking about like Giancarlo Stanton, didn't work as well. There's the Adrian Gonzalez trade, that did work well. So, I don't know. This could be kind of a mailbagish thing, a thing you can send in on to, what is your opinion as a listener about the viability of acquiring talent this way? It seems like it's never been cheaper, and yet the team is giving up on them, and they have more access to more knowledge about the player than anybody else. So I think I still think that this is like a undervalued, like the Padres did a pretty good job, right? It seems like. Just shopping this way. They got Snell and Darvish, and the two of them paid together something like 25-30 million.
Yeah, and you're shortening up the commitment in those cases. You're not taking
That's
5,
true
6,
too,
7
right?
years in those deals. So, it's one or the other. You're either saving money because the team trading the player away is sending you a big bundle of cash, and that's bringing down the AAV. So you're getting an AAV below the open market, or you're getting 3 or 4 years on the back part of the deal for a player that you trust will still age well, and you're not committing for 6 or 7, which
right.
When you think about competitive cycles for teams, that's closer to the size of a window.
3 or 4 fits. Yeah, 3 or 4 fits better.
I mean, 6 or 7 years, you could be good, bad, and then good again over a span of 6 or 7 years.
Tatis never signs an extension, the Padres could be bad again in 5 years. So
I don't want to make San Diego fans sad. There's so much to be happy about. I think he's on the cover of MLB The Show 21 too, which is a pretty sweet cover.
Probably might be the context neutral best player in baseball by projections. That's something I saw with the Bat X.
I'm glad the Bat X and I are on the same page. I like to stay friends with all the machines.
Oh, you hate Tatis
out there.
You hate Tatis. You're on record. We gotta find some of those drops.
We can go to the tape.
I'm sure we have some tape there of DVR saying, "I hate Fernando Tatis."
That's me rewinding.
And he will never be a good player.
I think I said I'd rather have Javi Baez a round or two later than Tatis going into last draft season.
That one didn't work so well. But then you also bought Fernando Tatis in auction and won that league.
Literally, the first player I got on my team in NL Labor was a player that I was talking about not wanting to draft, but it does go into something we talked about with
long con. You playing the media con game?
No, it's the nature of snake drafts. The issue I had with Tatis was just the order in which players are taken in snake drafts, feeling like I could get a similar player or an equal player a little later on. Right. It wasn't about Tatis himself never being good. I was worried about the K rate. I was worried about the back too. frankly, going into last season. But 2 thumbs up, 1-1 on my board right now. New rankings up too since it's February, so check those out on The Athletic. A handful of other news items since we last spoke. Didi Gregorius stays in Philly, so I think that will probably bring his price up a bit. We talked about him on our shortstop episode. There's only a handful of parks that he fits really well. Philadelphia happens to be on that list, so I think that's kind of a win-win for player and team, because had he left, I'm not really sure there was another player like him that they could put into that lineup. Eddie Rosario in Cleveland is pretty interesting, because when we spoke on Friday, we were talking about the Brewers as a possibility. They apparently were looking at him to maybe play some first base. But look, we've thrown all sorts of shade at Cleveland this offseason, and for good reason, with the decision to trade away Francisco Lindor. I like the Eddie Rosario signing for them quite a bit, because I feel like he's a bit better than the Domingo Santanas and the lower end players that they've been trying to use in their outfield corners to fill those gaps for the last couple of seasons. So this to me looks like a really good fit, and one where I think the power we saw in Minnesota carries over, if not even bumps up slightly in Cleveland. I like this fit a lot for Eddie Rosario.
Yeah, he's not great defensively, but he's projected to be about 10% better than league average with the bat. And I just wanted to look real quick and see when the last time was that they had someone do that in the outfield. And of course, it was Michael Brantley in 2018. But it's also instructive that they've only had in this century, I love saying this century, I mean, it's like 20 years, this century, this century, they've only had, let's see, they've only had 16 player seasons in the outfield where somebody hit better than 10% above league average. They are mostly owned by Shin-Soo Choo, Michael Brantley, Manny Ramirez, and Grady Sizemore.
They had a few good outfielders, but yeah, that's not enough outfield production over a century-long stretch. I mean, 20 years, like you said. It is a fun way to describe it. But in terms of his outlook and value, I think any little slide in Eddie Rosario's ADP will stop now that he has a team. Sometimes we see that as we move further into draft season, the unsigned players begin to fall down the board a round or two. He'll pop back up. I think he's a top 100 guy for me, because he's going to hit in the heart of that order. The run production should be good. The batting average from Rosario, 257 in the shortened season, was the lowest we've ever seen from him as a big leaguer. Projections are between 269 and 279. So if you said 274, I'd be okay with that. He's hit 277 for his career. In some ways, because he doesn't walk a lot, he's actually a better fantasy player than he is a real life player. You know, you think about all the ways he can produce value. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see maybe one more 30 home run season from Eddie Rosario here in 2021.
Yeah, he is a borderline talent, and in terms of how it all sums up, you could see why the Twins maybe made that decision. If the private defensive metrics are as bad as something like outs above average, which says he's one of the worst outfielders in the league, and he's headed towards DH-dom there, playing at sort of a 5 to 15% above average with the bat doesn't really move the needle much, and he'd be the kind of guy who signs small deals and goes and bounces around if those defensive metrics are for sure. But the Indians get him on a 1-year deal. He's still in his prime. I think I'd probably say more like 25 to 27 homers, but a decent batting average. Definitely a good bat to have in there. Will be the best outfielder they've got if you call Franmil Reyes a DH. So definitely a good move for him. He's very projectable. There's one thing that you would see if you look at Eddie Rosario's numbers is that he's basically been a 275, 315 OBP, 500 slugging guy for 4 years straight. There hasn't been a big breakout per se, but he's been like the same guy every year. And so I think that has a lot of value while he's still in his peak range. But at some time at 30, 31, 32, I'm going to peace out just because it's a little bit of that Danny Santana thing where, like, because of the defense, 1 year he could be in this situation and not get a good deal. Like, even if he'd ended up in Milwaukee as the first baseman, that would have been a bad deal compared to this one, I think, because, Milwaukee, they would have, kept Vogelbach around, or, moved Rosario to the outfield some days and sat him against tough lefties or whatever it is, because that's how the Brewers work. So, as he plays these musical chairs, at some point he's going to end up in a bad place for his fantasy value.
Yeah, but I think for one more year, I'm in at the price on Eddie Rosario.
I think I've had him 3 years running in AL labor.
Nope.
The price has gone up a little bit every year, but he's returned that price every year.
Might have to make it 4 for 4 this year during what could be his only season in Cleveland. One of their notes passed along, Masahiro Tanaka officially announcing at the end of last week that he has agreed to a contract to return to Japan. So it brings his 7-year time with the Yankees to a close. And it kind of looked like, based on some of the reaction, that there are factions of the Yankees fan base who somehow think that Tanaka underachieved during his time in New York, when I would say he lived up to all the expectations and maybe even exceeded them in some ways, right? I mean, he finishes with a 3.74 ERA, a 1.13 whip, 991 strikeouts in just over 1,000 innings, 19 WAR. I mean, that's really good for any pitcher over a 7-year stretch.
Yeah. I don't know, wins wise too, just double-digit wins every year. No losing records. Like, I don't normally talk about wins, but that's something that might fuel some people hating him. But he was 78 and 46. Like, what's so bad? I think the one thing that people may not understand as evenly across different parts of fandom is how tough of a park that is.
Yeah.
He gave up a fair amount of homers, and you might put that all on the pitcher, but I would put a lot of that on the park. So I would be surprised if he pitched in like St. Louis all those years. He would have had a much lower ERA, and his home run total would have been lower, and that he would have been the same quality pitcher.
It's true. Maybe part of the angst as it pertains to Tanaka in the eyes of those Yankee fans, they have not won a World Series since 2009. That's a long time to go without winning a World Series if you're a Yankees fan.
Definitely Tanaka's fault.
Totally. It's all his fault. But congrats to him finding a deal that he wanted. It's good for him.
You're not gonna gloss over the biggest news of the day.
Alex Cobb. What's the biggest news of the day?
Yeah. Alex Cobb to the Angels, baby.
Is there any reason? Reason to believe?
Yes. And it's extremely painful to me, but it's what the numbers say.
So you're willing to put your name on it now?
40 pitchers.
Because he's getting out of Baltimore.
Now, especially he's leaving Baltimore.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Now you're willing to put your name on it.
But he's one of 40 pitchers with the stuff and a command number over 103. So it's a small group of pitchers that have good command and good stuff like he does. The curveball is good. The splitter is good. The one thing that people say, well, why did he not do better if those things are true? One thing is he's sinker first, right? He's not a four-seam guy. And we know about sinkers being put in play more, and that's why he doesn't have a great strikeout rate. But put him in a better park where that home run rate comes down a little bit, and I think he'll have usable numbers in fantasy baseball this year. I think he could be. I don't know. I'm not predicting like a Bundy-esque situation, but look at what he did last year: 4.3 ERA, 1.34 WHIP. I think he could get that down to like a 4.10 and a 1.25.
Okay, let's play a quick game of Would You Rather. Never thought we'd be doing this with Alex Cobb, but
you have to scroll all the way down the ADP list.
I mean, I had 162 starting pitchers on my update that went up on Monday morning.
Alex Cobb.
Alex Cobb did not make the cut. But outside of Baltimore, he should make the cut. He will
Right.
be in the next update. So if
At
I'm
162.
yeah, so let's see, around 130. Okay, let's try this. John Lester, a new member of the Nationals rotation. John Lester or Alex Cobb in a deep redraft league.
Cobb.
Is your Cobb over Lester? How about
Yeah.
Cobb versus Johnny Cueto? I'm glad I found it that quickly. Wow, that's
You did. You found the right place for Would You Rather.
I have a gift. It's not a very marketable gift, but it's a gift nonetheless.
Let me just peruse my stuff and numbers for Mr. Cueto. I think they're pretty poor, actually.
I don't know if anyone likes Cueto at this point as based on
Cueto.
numbers. I think we like him
Cueto.
based on personality and whatnot. But
it's a 104 stuff for Cobb, 102 for Cueto. And it's 109 command plus for Cobb and 104 for Cueto. So Cobb beats him on both of those metrics, but even with the changes they made in San Francisco, I think just the allure of having like a strategy for Cueto use, you know what I mean?
Home streamer mostly.
Yeah. Whereas Cobb, you'd just be sort of guessing if you were trying to, but if I was forced to put them, like if you're talking about, they're not in the same league, so you can't do NL only or AL only, but in an only league, I might go Cobb. My numbers say he's better.
All right, one more. How about his new teammate?
Oh, there's one last number. Wait, one last number. This is important. I have tiers for injury risk. Cobb is in the 91st, like he's 91st, like he's, going to get hurt, like 91st
percentile in injury risk.
Yeah. Cueto is in the 99th.
Oh.
So that actually didn't help at all either.
No.
I would say they're very similar. I would put them right next to each other. I think Cobb and Cueto I'd put them right next to each other.
Okay, let's figure out who the neighbor on the other side is. How about Cobb's new teammate, Patrick Sandoval? If you're throwing a dart on one of those back-end starters for the Angels, is it Cobb or is it Sandoval? I know where you're going with this one.
I'm going to go with Cobb.
Oh, a surprise.
Well, Sandoval has below average stuff and command. And the way that they went and got Cobb, I feel like they're saying like, hey, they traded Jahmai Jones for him. I feel like they're saying that he's in our rotation, whereas Sandoval has options, I think, still. So he becomes the up and down guy, 6, 7 starter, whatever it is, 7th starter, because they're probably going to do a 6-man rotation. So the one thing that's weird about all this, I did want to bring up, other than just looking at insanely deep pitchers that nobody cares about, is that do you think this means that that Ohtani's not going to pitch this year?
I think this is a case where the Angels have learned a lesson that many of us learned playing score sheet, in that you can never have too many starters. Like if you think you have enough starters, you still don't have enough. That's just the truth. I think they've had a ton of arm injuries. We've talked about Bundy, Ohtani, Heaney, and Canning all having arm injuries in their somewhat recent past.
Cobb being 91st percentile.
Cobb being high risk. Quintana maybe not being able to wash dishes after stabbing himself washing the dishes last year.
Canning was on the shelf last year, right? Or was it the year before?
I think it was for a stretch during the shortened season or coming out of 2019 into the shortened season. We were worried about his arm. I think they just need volume, because even if they're going to use Ohtani and they trust Ohtani, if they're going to keep a 6-man rotation, they probably need 10 or 11 starters to do it. And now they've got probably 8 that they would actually trust, and maybe a list of 10 that could end up taking the ball.
Which is good. The average team, when I checked, of a billion years ago, used 10. So I would assume that they used like something like 12 starting pitchers a year this year. And back when we looked, they gave heavy innings to the first 7. So in this case, you're doing a 6-man rotation, so you expect to give heavy innings to at least 7 or 8. And that means that Sandoval is going to pitch. But because he has options, because he's young, because he's maybe more fungible, because maybe he doesn't have the same upside as the other veteran pitchers have shown when they're healthy, now you have Sandoval as your up and down security policy.
Yeah.
And you have 6 viable major league starters to begin the season. So I think that part's overblown. Maybe I think Ohtani, they're going to give him one more shot. And I just want to have one of those great, healthy Ohtani seasons. I want to know how much value. I want to look at the end of the year and see how much value a 9 category player could have.
It'd be really cool to see him make it through the season healthy and effective. The per game numbers, per inning numbers in his debut season were really good. So if we could get that over a complete 2021, that would be huge, especially where he's going. He's actually very nicely discounted right now. Let's get on to our third base position preview. I begin with an apology to Jose Ramírez. I am sorry I ever doubted you as a player. I know it was a mistake to even be worried about what you could do coming off that 2019 season. For those who don't remember, Jose Ramírez had an atrocious first half in 2019, bounced back in a big way, and I recall just not wanting anything to do with him in the back part of round 1 in my 2020 drafts, and that was a mistake because he's still there. He's kind of pushing just outside the top 10 in terms of ADP. I think the only thing really working against Jose Ramírez, is not having Francisco Lindor there does hurt this offense, this lineup as a whole. So we might see a little bit of a drop off in what Ramírez can do with some of his counting stats, but he's not really showing any signs of slowing down, at least on the surface, with power output or even with speed. And we're still talking about a guy that is 28? So he turned 28 in September. So we're not at past 30. We're not worried about the stolen bases completely falling off a cliff at this point in Jose Ramírez's career either.
Yeah, well, he helped, fuel my my run at the AL Labor title. And it's funny because I remember way before COVID, the auction that we had in Florida, I remember thinking I need to have either Devers or Jose Ramírez as my starting third baseman. And I'll have this whole sort of decision tree that follows from that. And, because one will give me more stolen bases, one more average, that sort of deal. And I wasn't willing to push with the market. The elite players, a lot of times in auctions, will cost exactly at your value or maybe even $1 or $2 more. And sometimes you have to pay that premium to get one of the elite players. You don't want to pay, $10 over your number, but if Trout goes for $10 over your numbers, you realize that there's a premium for those top end players. And then you start looking for where can I pay maybe $1 or $2 extra. Anyway, I ended up with Ramírez because I got him at $1 over and wasn't willing to go to $3 over my value for Devers. I came out of the auction thinking that was a terrible decision that I'd made and that it was going to sink my whole season, and I was so dumb. But it ended up being prescient. And, one of the things that this highlights, I think, is sprint speed as a proxy for athleticism and as to give us a sense of how a player might age, what the shape of their bell curve will be. I've already talked about how Gary Sanchez is a worse hitter because he's so slow. But what we saw with Devers is he hit the ground running at 21, he was 75th percentile in running. So then he had some stolen bases. And we thought, okay, this is an athletic guy. But you look at him and you watch him play, and then you might not be surprised that he dropped immediately to the sort of 50th percentile in his next 2 years. And then last year dropped down to the 40th percentile and has been getting slower since he dropped off a fair amount. I asked, Derek Carty, the guy, he runs the Bat X, and the Bat X versus Steamer, Devers is the fourth biggest difference between the two. And sprint speed is part of the reason why. Sprint speed informs your BABIP, it informs your stolen base total, and to some extent, some of your aging factors. So it's a lot of different things that led to the Bat X saying he's a $21 player and Steamer saying he's a $30 player. But sprint speed is a big part of that. So I don't know. Don't have Ramirez's sprint seat up in front of me. I'm trying to get that right now. But
59th percentile for 2020.
And how is it for year to year?
He was 72nd percentile in 19. He was 60th percentile in 18. So it moves between
the
last 2 seasons.
But still, still pretty comfortably above average and not as sort of precipitous a drop, I think, as you saw with Devers, like going from 78th to 74th, 75th, 60th, and he bounced back in 2019 to 72nd. That's like a more steady drop. There's something about Devers's like sort of large drop from 75th percentile to 50th percentile in 1 year that says that there's something going on there body wise. The things I like about him is that he's got a good hit tool. He's improved the standard deviation of his launch angle Devers has. And so I think he has a good hit tool. But he also does not have a good sense of where the plate is. He swings pitches outside the zone, and then he has this like body thing that may suggest that he won't. He now has more in common with Pablo Sandoval than I figured.
I mean,
I'm not trying to body shame him. I'm sorry.
No, it's not like that at all. I do think with Devers, for a player that young to have some apparent conditioning problems is always a concern. But I do think with Devers, like, we're seeing a little bit of that kind of sneaky athleticism too, in the form of some long tail speed. Like you do see a handful of steals sprinkled in. So I still have some hope that he can get everything under control and actually bounce back.
Maybe it's just inconsistent effort or back. Maybe it's that stuff. Maybe it's a little bit of an injury that he does that keeps him from doing his best runs every time.
Could be. So after Ramírez is the only clear first rounder based on ADP. You have Manny Machado and DJ LeMahieu. We've talked about, I think, at least on 2 episodes already, since he's eligible at first and second. Arenado, who we talked about just a few minutes ago. Anthony Rendon, Devers, and Bregman. Now, Rendon, Devers, and Bregman are all kind of lumped together just at the back, kind of outside the top 40 overall in drafts since January 1st. Arenado and LeMahieu go about 10 spots ahead of that, and Machado goes almost 10 spots ahead of LeMahieu. The thing I'm having trouble with when I look at the third base position, I can't see enough of a difference between projections and expectations for Manny Machado at that high price from this cluster compared to what you're going to get or you're expected to get from pretty much any one of Rendon, Devers, or Bregman. I think Devers brings the most risk and the most volatility for the reasons that you mentioned. But I think in his range of outcomes, I would agree with what it says in his Baseball HQ forecaster box. Devers has the type of tools that can win an MVP award. That is within his range. I see Rendon and Bregman as really stable players, 2 guys that are very unlikely to disappoint us if they're healthy. So just circling back to Machado versus Rendon and Bregman, am I right to see very little difference between those 3 players? My inclination is to say I'm going to pass on Machado in the second round, either get a pitcher or get some speed. And then when it comes back to me in round 3, if I want to get an early third baseman, I'll be just fine with any one of Rendon or Bregman or possibly even Devers.
Yeah, I was going to say that this might be more of an auction thing than a snake draft thing, because Manny Machado does project. I think Arenado is going to drop off this projection when he's adjusted for St. Louis. But by the Bad X, Manny Machado is the second best third baseman at $25. But Devers is right there at $20. And Suarez at 23. I think Suarez, I hate to jump ahead, but Suarez to me is one of the bigger value propositions. But I was going to say, this basically are all just third rounders. So I guess in some ways I could see the like eat this, not that, where you get something in the second round, like a pitcher, which if you didn't get one in the first round, it almost seems like you have to these days. Get your ace in the second, and then you won't be sad having lost out on Manny Machado, because basically everybody, Arenado, Rendon, Devers, Bregman, those are all just third rounders. That's what that ADP says to me. It's all just third rounders. So then you can have your pick.
Yeah, I think in a vacuum, if you were just saying we're in an auction scenario, you're going to pay dollar for dollar for the players as you see fit. I actually think I like Bregman and Rendon a hair more than Machado. I mean, we're talking like a buck or two on the margins. We're not talking about big differences at all. They're all ranked next to each other in my overall hitter list. But I've got Arenado tied into that group. I've got Devers connected to that group. I mean, there's so little that separates this group. Like, happily take what's left. And if you miss, you have the parachute. You have Eugenio Suarez. I'm glad you brought him up. His projections are ridiculous. Yeah, you're giving up a little bit of batting average compared to the other top-end third baseman, but I think the bats got him for 47 home runs, a 373 WOBA, 115 RBIs, and 107 runs. I hate to say this, but I think the Reds' offense as a whole is a little bit underrated right now. And I'm going to find that Suarez and Mike Moustakas in particular probably end up on a lot of my teams.
Yeah. That's something I noticed when I was doing team futures was that the Reds, pitching staff is undervalued because their stuff number is way better than their projected quality as a staff, and that their hitting, their hitters are actually probably undervalued too, because the BATX loves them more than any other projection system, and that's tied to their StatCast underpinning. So what we saw last year from Suarez, even though it wasn't one of his best years batting average wise, was the best barrel rate of his career. And since that's coming off of 2019, where he had the best barrel rate of his career to that point, your regression would have taken back to like league leading type barrels. He'll be in the top 10, top 15 when it comes to barrel rate next year. So that's good. And you want that. And I think that's my favorite strategy of the whole thing. The one thing that stands out to me about that other group is Bregman is least liked by the bat compared to the other systems. Only 28 homers and 4 stolen bases, a $17 to $18 player. And that's because his StatCast numbers are underwhelming. Last year, he had a 3.9% barrel rate. It's not good. That's below average. His best barrel rate was 7.4%. And that was in 2018. He's never had a good barrel rate. And I kind of think that the only thing I can say in response is that he's never had a good barrel rate, and he's had all these good numbers. And that I think maybe he's kind of figured out his home stadium in like kind of Brian Dozier-esque way, that he's figured out where in the Crawford boxes to aim and to get all his cheapy homers. And it's kind of hard to say he won't do that again when he's going to be back in the same home park.
Yep.
I might be most negative on Bregman if he leaves that park, but all the situations that were there last year to have him hit for good power, something that would have been on the level of 20, 25 homers probably in a full season, they're all still there. And the conditions that led him to hit 41 homers are all still there. So I don't think he was made by the cheating. And I think that a lot of the cheating was finished by 2019 and 2018. So I don't know. Bregman is a tough one for me. I love the plate discipline, the contact. And I think that he will have a high floor, even if he doesn't hit for that power. But it is worth pointing out that the StatCast numbers on Bregman are not good.
Part of it too, though, and I think this applies a bit to Arenado to some extent. It definitely applies to Jose Ramirez. It certainly applies to Bregman. When you put a lot of balls in play, I think you are going to lose something off of your hard hit rates, your average exit velocities, your barrel rates. So I think it's important to point this out, because compared to the other elite players who might be close in K rate, if only slightly higher, there is a gap. But I think it's something of the byproduct of striking out 15% of the time or less for the last 4 years. So that's what I'm pretty mindful of with Bregman. I think the thing that you've said a couple times about him that I keep carrying with me, he fits the park perfectly. He is adjusted to his environment. He is taking advantage of a ballpark that rewards pull power from the right side. And I see a pretty nice bounce back coming from him. I mean, 280 or better 3 years in a row before the shortened season. Power kept ticking up year over year. Even if I get back to the 2018 power, if he's a 30 home run guy with 100 runs and 100 RBIs, that's a steal in the third round. You're really happy with that sort of output. regardless whether or not he steals any bags. Maybe he gets you a handful of bags. Maybe he doesn't. But I think the other part of this too, and this is just the way I think about the player pool as a whole, what might keep me away from top-end third baseman is my confidence in some of the other options. Suarez, absolutely among them. Sometimes you run the risk of hoping you get the discounted player and then you don't get him and then you're screwed. So you should have invested earlier. I don't think that's necessarily true at third base, but for the players who go around Suarez, Yohan Moncada is heavily discounted. He has talked about how much he was impacted by COVID in 2020. Jeff McNeil didn't show us the same power in 2020 that he did in 2019. He had a pretty significant injury at one point as well. Obviously a multi-position guy, so it's nice to have that. And you got Max Muncy, who's come up on a few episodes too, because he's first and second base eligible. All those guys go inside the top 100, all within 15 picks of each other. Out of Moncada, McNeil, and Muncy, do you see enough value there to be interested in them at their respective prices?
I had to just rerun my auction values because it had 20 games to qualify a position as the default. And I hope your leagues aren't using that, because that makes it really difficult to accrue a position in a 60-game season. But there, I changed it to 8, which is kind of industry standard. And there's Muncy hanging out with Jeff McNeil as all sort of $15 players. I forget what the question was. Do I like those players? Do you
see enough there? I mean, because Suarez is clearly the best value of the bunch for me. But I think like Muncy's fine where he's going. With Moncada, I don't think he's the player we saw in the shortened season. I mean, I think we had a fair question to ask coming out of 2019. Like where can we really trust his line to be as a hitter? Because the jump from the 230s to hitting 315 was pretty weird. He did bring the K rate down a little bit in 2019, but that jumped up on him in 2020. Projections have him at like 249 to 261 at the high end. I think Zips is the high projection. They all had him in the low 20s for home runs, and then a little bit of speed, good run production because of the lineup. Would you take the over on like a 255 batting average projection for Moncada?
I mean, I wish we knew better about this disease. You know, I don't really love the profile in terms of what he does at the plate with the strikeouts. And it's obvious to see that he had the worst sprint speed of his career last year. But it is also, even in his reduced capabilities due to COVID and the shortened season and age, he still was 70th percentile when it came to his foot speed. So he didn't steal any bases. And so that might lead you to say he won't steal any bases next year. It might lead projections to only project him for 6, 7, 8 stolen bases. But he still is 70th percentile speed. And he is presumably going to be healthy. That's why I'm sort of sighing about COVID. But I think he can hit 260, 275. I think he could hit 275. Yeah, I think he could hit 275. What I would want to see is he's looks good. He looks like he looks trim and he's running fast. I think that actually will matter the most for his batting average, because he's just going to strike out a lot. That he's shown us year in and year out.
And I think he's the kind of hitter, because he hits the ball so hard, he can exceed our expectations relative to his strikeout rate. That's possible. Yeah. He also runs well enough to maintain an elevated BABIP. I don't think he's necessarily a dead pull sort of hitter.
That's what I'm sort of talking about,
Yeah, like there's a lot of things he does well to offset some of his biggest flaws. Still actually pretty young too. So I'm in. I think a 6.2% barrel rate in the shortened season is easily the lowest we've seen from him over the last 4 seasons. This is a guy that's usually up above 9%, peaked at 12.2% in barrel rate with that massive 2019. So I don't think you have to get a full bounce back to 2019 to be happy where he's going.
Look at this. Why was that way over there? I'm sorry. You're going to have to maybe adjust my levels. But, in the auction values, Moncada is in interesting space and I don't know if this lines up with the ADPs. I'm looking at this right now, but in the auction values, he sits nestled in between Justin Turner and Chris Bryant, which I find really fascinating because Justin Turner and Chris Bryant are a little bit more on the oatmeal side in that they seem projectable. They're, at least Bryant is still mid-career. Turner has some drop-off capabilities due to his age. But they seem just like steady Eddie, easy to bet on, whereas Moncada seems to, have a much higher ceiling, maybe a lower floor. But I think I would easily take Moncada over Bryant and Turner. I feel like the variability also goes in the good direction. And that's like, it's like some sort of, there's a name for this where you just only think about the good possibilities and don't think about the bad possibilities. It could go south on Moncada. I think he could strike out 35% of the time, not recover the speed, have a 280 BABIP and hit 210 with 22 homers and 5 stolen bases. I doubt that Bryant or Turner would have a season that bad.
Yeah, you're getting a more volatile player, but I'm more in than out on Moncada, especially at the price. The ADP stays around 85. I think he's fine in that range. If you get sniped on Suarez, Moncada right there could be a very reasonable alternative. I think with McNeil, I'm chasing him more in leagues where I've got some early batting average risk, or if I know I'm going to need some batting average risk to make up ground in power later on, right? If I can kind of tell I'm power light because I've got plenty of speed early, let's go ahead and fortify that batting average with a high volume sort of player. And if McNeil comes out and hits 310 or 315 with 15 homers and a good number of runs scored and a decent number of RBIs, that's fine because he's there to offset a Kyle Schwarber or maybe a Miguel Sano or somebody else who I feel really good about from a power standpoint, Joey Gallo, who I think is really undervalued. I think that's the specific target for McNeil. You don't have to go get those guys to justify him, but I find myself wanting to take him in anticipation of getting that surplus in power from somebody else later on. Muncy, I think, is fine where he's going as well. It's kind of interesting. His projection looks very similar to Matt Chapman, who goes about 20 picks later. But Chapman's coming off surgery on his hip to repair a torn labrum. And I think that difference is actually justified until we know where things stand with Chapman as we get closer to the start of the season.
Yeah, but I like how you set that up with LeMay and McNeil and what they can do, to open up your possibilities later. A Muncy and Chapman pick means, that your batting average just took a hit, and that now you have to start thinking about batting average when you start picking out players. But if you pick a LeMahieu and McNeil there instead, you set yourself up for taking a low power slugger later. And there just seem to be more low power sluggers that you can depend on than there are high batting average guys later on in the draft. I mean, that's just the way baseball is trending these days. So as much as I want to take like Chapman or Muncy and hope some good bad ball luck gets me to like 260 or 270, and then I took the better player, maybe the better player there, despite the same projection, like it's $14.8 for DJ LeMahieu and Max Muncy. I'm positing that DJ LeMahieu is a better player, even if they have the same exact auction value.
Yeah, I know we've talked about LeMahieu on the second base episode. I have come to the conclusion that the projections might just be wrong about him. They just don't seem to fit who he is as a player. He hits the ball really hard. He puts a ton of balls in play. You can't shift against them because he hits the ball everywhere. And he's back with the Yankees. The numbers, it seems like, under project his power. I expect more like 25 home runs. I think projections are in the high teens. I don't know how much of that is the longer track record if I'm not hitting a lot of home runs during his time in Colorado. Hopefully that's mostly washed out of the projection by now. But I still see something better than the Michael Brantley, Jeff McNeil sort of profile from LeMahieu. At the same time, given the alternatives, given that I'm more confident in 30 home runs from the likes of Rendon and Bregman and other guys that go around him, LeMahieu sort of seems like he's just not going to fit on a lot of my teams, which is really weird. Yeah. I like him, like the player, but maybe in auctions,
for what it's worth,
not in drafts.
Jeff McNeil is projected to be 40 cents less. So if there's a large difference in ADP, maybe McNeil is the play there.
Maybe.
But I find this position to be a nice deep position, and I think that you should only take a third baseman that fits your offensive strategy and fits your team, and it comes at some sort of discount off of what you see, because I think there are going to be lots of later players that are interesting. JD Davis, Alec Bohm, Austin Riley, those are all young players that do certain things interestingly. Like Austin Riley StatCast numbers really improved year over year. I know he's still got some bad walks and strikeout stuff in there, but JD Davis, the question has never been about his bat. You're just hoping that he holds on to third base on the depth chart because of his defense. And then Alec Bohm is just, it's amazing how steady he is for a young guy. Like he seems like maybe not the highest ceiling in the world, but definitely love his plate discipline, contact, and power combination. So that trio alone makes me feel like I'll be safe. If I took 2 out of those 3 and didn't take any of the top guys, I would still feel pretty good.
My only concern, I guess, with Bohm is just the price. Like he's right around pick 100. I think his ADP is 104. So you're talking about late 7th round, early 8th round of a 15-team league. I think when I look at him compared to Chris Bryant a couple rounds later, I mean, I know Chris Bryant's probably not MVP peak Chris Bryant anymore, but this version of Chris Bryant probably isn't all that different than what you're hoping to get from Alec Bohm. And with Bohm, maybe he gets buried in the lineup a little bit. With Bryant, you're not really worried about that. I'm taking Bryant with a discount for 2021 only.
Yeah, I think I might too. I mean, just on projections, Bryant is supposed to be $3 better than Bohm. That's a big enough difference for me that if they were both available to me in one round, I would take Bryant.
Let's talk about Ke'Bryan Hayes for a moment. He is going behind Bryant, just inside the top 150 overall. This feels like the market getting hyped about an awesome debut that was really short. And the Pirates, as we've said, are going to be very bad. Playing time, not really a concern. Lineup position should be pretty good. Hit tool has always been kind of ahead of the power for Ke'Bryan Hayes. He's a great defender, so he's going to stick at third base. They're not going to mess around with him at all. I think he's just up for good at this point. How much do you trust what you saw power-wise from him coming off of such a limited amount of playing time in the shortened season?
Yeah, we got 65 batted ball events. So we're not going to say that that much about his barrel rate, which is good. But we could point out that his max EV at 110 is okay and is pretty good, but it's not what you'd expect from a guy who will hit 35 or 40 homers. It's a little bit back from that. So projections say 16 homers pretty much across the board. I might take the over on that. That seems a little low, but I also don't think he'll hit 30 homers.
No,
where would you put the over under on his homers? I mean, the projections say the over under is around 16. Zips has him hitting 12.
Yeah, Zips is lighter on playing time though too. So
that's right. He's gonna get the playing time.
I actually think these playing time numbers are all low. I actually think he's over on playing 21. Time. Yeah, I'd probably say 19.5 if I were making odds on Ke'Bryan Hayes 2021 home run totals.
Yeah, the Bat X goes the furthest on playing time with 605 plate appearances. Why wouldn't he just play all year? It's interesting spot there.
I don't think they're going to play games with him at this point. I mean, he's already 24. They've already waited this long, so just let it happen at this point.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem drafting him there, but there's some other players in the overall playing pool picture that I like better, other position options that fit better on my teams than Ke'Bryan Hayes in that spot.
How about this, though? Here's an interesting player, and it's kind of the flip side. We were just talking about playing time, and that playing time is huge when it comes to player value. It's the biggest differentiation between projection systems and value systems, and it's one of the biggest drivers of of winning in fantasy baseball is getting the playing time correct. But sometimes I wonder if like people who will be injured and won't give you the full playing time, but are really good when they are in, are undervalued. So the person I'm thinking about this in respect to is Josh Donaldson. If you have Josh Donaldson and then he comes in, like especially I think in like more shallower leagues or leagues where unlimited DL, I feel like Josh Donaldson's a good pick because when he's in, he's going to be great. And if you can find anything on the wire to replace him when he's out, you'll be fine. So I think it has some question of like what replacement level is in your league. I think in AL labor, it'll be a little bit difficult because if I had Josh Donaldson in, and then even though I have unlimited DL, I put him on the DL, there's nothing on the wire. I'd be playing Kiner Falefa.
Yeah, you're playing a utility guy in his place while he's out. So that drop is pretty sharp. And I think you're right. Like the league structure, we talked about shallow leagues versus like mid-sized leagues. In shallow leagues, love Donaldson. The deeper the league, it depends how much risk I've taken on to that point in the auction or in the draft. Where he's going, I think he's a risk worth taking because if you look back at 2019, the lone season that Josh Donaldson played in Atlanta, those were the skills of a late second round pick. 37 homers, 94 RBIs, 96 runs, a 379 OBP. You're giving up a little something in the batting average category compared to the elite of the elite third baseman, right? Compared to the Rendons and the Bregmans and the Machados. Like there's a step down in that average category, but the power and run production should be very similar on a per game sort of basis. So I would agree with you that generally Josh Donaldson undervalued. I would be comfortable using him as my corner. If I was waiting a long time at third base, okay, I'm probably going to get him plus one of the next guys we're going to talk about just to make sure I'm covered at third base. Maybe you could double tap something like Josh Donaldson with Brian Anderson. You're not really worried about Brian Anderson not playing enough in Miami, so you've got a constant third base eligible, solid player across the board who would also be there as your corner if Donaldson's your starter at third in a mixer. I think that could work in kind of an extreme situation where you've been attacking every other position and every other category first because you're getting a lot of playing time for a pretty discounted price. The other player in that range that the projections really like is Gene Segura. Not a shortstop anymore, but third base eligible, kind of back at the top 200 in a hitter-friendly park in Philly. The Phillies bullpen is still very suspect, but they're going to score runs. Like they're running it back with an offense that should be pretty good. And with a full year of Bohm, that's one more quality bat they have, assuming that Rhys Hoskins is healthy following elbow surgery. And this is one of the better lineups in the National League. And I think Gene Segura is quietly just going to do typical Gene Segura things somewhere in that lineup.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have to apologize here to Alan Harrison. we were doing some last minute Ottoneu wheeling and dealing on Sunday. We were attempting to, and I wasn't in front of my computer. So when he asked for Gene Segura, like we were talking about a deal package on him. Then I got down to my computer and like checked him out and was like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Because I've got him for like $8 in Ottoneu. It's just it's like a really excellent price. It's good to see that Segura's running speed really bounced back after a low point in 2017 due to health. He's still a good runner. And the best part of him is just that he helps you across the board. He will give you some stolen bases. I don't know if he'll give you 10 or if he'll give you 15. And I don't know if he'll hit you 18 homers or, 22, but I know the Bat X likes him. I know that he will give you performance in all the hitting categories. And he does it at my position, and he'll probably have some positional eligibility for you. He could be an interesting guy to put in MI or to put in util if you did the Donaldson thing, because he should be able to play short and third and second for you. So Segura is based on his price and the way that you can move him around your lineup and the value he gives you across the board, I think he's absolutely him and Eugenio Suarez are like my favorite third baseman right now.
High volumes of playing time, on the cheap as it pertains to both Segura and Josh Donaldson. You mentioned Austin Riley and J.D. Davis a bit earlier. I think Riley's positives in the shortened season, improved plate discipline. He's always hit the ball hard, and he's got a track record of getting to a new level, adjusting, and then eventually playing at a slightly higher level. If you look back at the first time he was at AAA versus the return to AAA, there's a big difference in strikeout rate in particular. That gives me some hope that if he's got a regular spot in that Braves lineup, he'll be a tick undervalued outside the top 200 overall. Justin Turner kind of fits into that free agent conversation. Once he has a team, I think he'll move up 15, 20 picks, maybe get to the back of the top 200. Seems a little undervalued right now. Kind of similar to Josh Donaldson in some ways. Less power at this point, of course, but similar in that there's injury risk. But when he's out there, the per game numbers are a bit better than you'd expect compared to what he actually costs in ADP.
You know, a guy I like back here too is Heimer Candelario. He's one of the last players that I would feel comfortable sort of manning a corner infield position for me in a 15-team league. You know, after him, it drops down to, you know, like Evan Longoria and, you know, bigger playing time risks like Yandy Diaz and, you know, David Fletcher, Luis Urias, kind of play him everywhere types. So Heimer Candelario is that fail stop, I think. It's like the worst case scenario. It's not bad. He's still projected to be worth about $5 and, you know, in a 15-team league and be a useful player. And there's a lot of reasons to like him. His barrel rate jumped with a little bit of regression there. He should be a good barrel rate guy. I think he could hit 280 with 25 homers next year. So he's definitely a playable guy, but he's also represents how deep the position is. You know, a guy who could hit, you know, 275, 280 next year with 25 homers is the worst case scenario, you know, but he also, there's a huge drop off after him. You know, it's a barren wasteland once you've slipped to the second page on Fangraphs.
Yeah, second pagers, a little rough, but I think Ryan McMahon might be a lot safer with Arenado gone in Colorado, because now they could just play him every day at third base, and maybe it stabilizes Garrett Hampson too. But maybe McMahon and Hampson can coexist together, or McMahon and Brendan Rodgers can coexist together. I
watch them sign Michael Franco. Oh, I just called it.
Franco and Jonathan VR here to ruin our lives as
we're using the Arenado savings, baby.
Oh, it's our gift to you, the fans of this great franchise, to come out to the ballpark later this summer when we can have fans back and watch Jonathan VR and Michael Franco
boot the ball around.
Come on. But I think with Ryan McMahon, part of the appeal in deeper leagues especially, he's eligible at first, second, and third entering the season. Might not have all that eligibility going into next season, but hey, I'll take it for 2021. Hit 24 home runs in just 539 plate appearances in 2019. It wasn't a great line, but it was acceptable. 250, 329, 450. Still striking out about 30% of the time, even when he was good. So I'm not looking for some kind of massive breakout. I'm looking for someone who will accumulate pretty good numbers over a full season simply by virtue of having a lot of playing time in Colorado. So, you know, I don't think he's ever going to be a guy we're talking about as a top 100 overall kind of player, but I do think you can draft him where he's going right now and not be completely miserable in the process.
Not a true second pager by my estimation here with the bad X. He's I think above Heimer,
above the fold,
and above the fold, and worth $8 according to this, on par with Seager. Seager is a nice oatmeal-y pickup, I think, for leagues. You know, he's just not the kind of guy who's valued by most people. They would look at the age, you know, rightfully so, to point out that, like, you know, all the variabilities on the poor end, but he's also super projectable in that he's just been this, like, a metronome guy, you know, like a 200 ISO guy with a good strikeout rate that's gonna, you know, some years not great batting average because of the pull rates and how he gets shifted. but also capable of hitting 240, 250 with 25 to 30 homers every year, and actually steals bases, weirdly. So, Seager is one of those boring options that I think people don't go to enough. And he's right there with McMahon. I'd like, the risk that the Rockies do the dumb thing still exists for me on McMahon. So if faced with those two back to back, I might pick Seager.
I don't think you're wrong to avoid the scenario in which the Rockies could screw it up. I do like Seager. I think we should have an all oatmeal team at some point this draft season. Hopefully by that time I'll learn how to make graphics for the YouTube channel, and we'll have some oatmeal. Maybe I'll eat an oatmeal cream pie on the stream.
Oatmeal raining down.
Oatmeal's not terrible, right? I'll eat the Trader Joe's apple cinnamon oatmeal. That stuff's pretty good. Late options. That's too much information. Some late options at the third base position. Edwin Rios would be interesting if he found some playing time. I'm just really convinced that Justin Turner's going back there to take third base over, and then Rios is kind of more of a NL only league or draft and hold type player.
Yeah, Yandy Diaz, I'm like always in the tank for, just because, he's a guy who hits the ball hard and has really good plate discipline. And in any given year, I feel like we could get some good health. To me, the depth chart has Joey Wendell and Wander Franco ahead of him. And Wendell, to me, is more of a true utility player. Wander Franco is not in the big leagues yet and may not be until later. And then would he play third? So I think Yandy is being undervalued by just looking at the sort of depth chart issues. And anybody who can hit the ball really hard and has good plate discipline has the chance to have a good year. Because one of the ways that you can change your launch angle and hit for more power is to target high balls high in the zone. They go for higher launch angle. So, if he's got a good sense of where the plate is, then he has the ability to target certain pitches. So that's my Yandy Diaz one. But then you'll like this other one. I like on the second fold. I just took him in Fantrax best ball as my third baseman, Luis Urias.
I'm on board with that because they are doing a whole lot of nothing at that third base spot.
It seems like they've got somebody penciled in there, maybe.
I hope Urias is that guy for my sake, because like you, I am targeting him in draft and hold. He's eligible to a bunch of spots. We saw what he did at AAA with power. Again, giving him a pass, hoping he is back and productive here in 2021. As far as current prospects, we'll throw one former prospect into this part of the conversation because we should talk about him somewhere. Spencer Torkelson and Josh Jung, I would say, are the two players that are potentially going to debut as third base prospects. I'm surprised the Tigers are trying Torkelson at third base. I mean, it doesn't hurt. If it doesn't work, you move him to first base and move somebody else out of his way when the time comes. So I guess for our sake, it's cool if he actually can handle it and hang there for a little while. But I think in the case of Torkelson, you probably could have argued that they should have given him some playing time at the big league level last summer just to continue his development. I realize that comes with starting his service time clock, and then you got to think about sending him down for 2021 to begin the year if it doesn't go well. But I don't think that would have been the worst thing in the world. My question for you is he draftable in typical redraft leagues, or is he more of a wait and see because you think we're going to have to wait until maybe June or July before there's even a chance he gets called up?
Yeah, I think in both him, I think maybe in Jung's case, I could see a pathway to him being up sooner, because I think that the Rangers have a possibility of being okay. I don't think that necessarily about the Tigers. And the Rangers, to me, it's like Dunning and Allard and Cody all pitch pretty well. And then Gibson and Lyles are just kind of steady Eddie. And they figure out there is some talent on the team in terms of like, where does Calhoun play? Where does Solak play? And I think they kind of get beyond, like, I'm trying to describe like a good season for the Rangers and one that works out where Jung is up earlier. And that is they cycle through Odor and Andrews and find ways to get value out of them, not in the starting positions. Solak and Dahl and Calhoun all thrive in starting positions. The young pitching advances quicker, and third base becomes this like open question where you're kind of like, you've got Andrews and Odor and you're just trying to figure it out, and Jung is raking, right? Then you say, well, the team's doing pretty good. It's past, it's been like 4 weeks. We don't want to wait till June. Let's just bring up Jung now. He won't be Super 2. Let's just bring up now. So I could see that happening more than I can see the same thing happening for the Tigers, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of how I've looked at the Tigers situation. They also have Isaac Paredes, who they could bring up again and play for a bit before Torkelson debuts.
And the Tigers will be incentivized to give Paredes a fair look, like a long look, maybe even a half season, full season type look.
Right. I mean, you've got Paredes and Willie Castro on the left side of the infield. Goodrum plays second for now. I think eventually Goodrum gets bumped. If the left side gets more crowded, Goodrum moves. He's the kind of player that just moves to wherever you need him. He's sort of like another VR where as the team gets better, he accommodates everybody else, right. Not the other way around.
Right.
If Torkelson plays first, I wonder if Jamer goes back across to play third, or, eventually Miguel Cabrera's contract runs out and they'll have the DH spot. But for now, that's also kind of limiting some of their options. I don't see them having a path to being very good this year. I think they could be pretty interesting in 2022, though, because that young pitching, it starts to click. They could be one of those teams that takes a step forward a year from now, but I don't think we see it this season.
Yeah, I think another way of saying it is that like the Tigers have more sort of borderline young players they have to cycle through, and cycling through means they have to give them 6 months, they have to give them 3 months try, right? And then decide, okay, we'd like his bat enough to play him, like Heimer. In Heimer's case, we'd like his bat enough to play him at first, but not as glove at third. They're going to have to go through that evaluation process with all these players. I feel like the Rangers don't have that for more of their players. Like I think they, maybe there's some question of where Solak can play. Otherwise, they know there's a little bit more known commodities. So they don't, like if Andrews or Odor is like not really being valuable, they could just be cut.
Yeah. At this point,
they're not part of the next
sunk
future
cost.
Rangers team.
Yeah,
exactly.
You accept that. Maybe you eat some money, trade them to a team that wants to use them as utility guys. I think Andrews actually would have a little more appeal than Odor at this point. The former prospect I sort of hinted at in passing, Carter Kieboom, he's got a job for now. I'm just waiting for them to do something. One more trade, sign a veteran. I've lost all my faith in Carter Kieboom. It's gone. Like I don't even want to throw late darts at him anymore, which is in part because he doesn't really barrel the ball, and they don't seem enamored with him. I think our conversations with Britt and just how they seem to feel about him internally is starting to have a legitimate impact on how I view Kieboom and his previously perceived ceiling.
Yeah. Yeah, and looking back, some of his power might have been softer than we thought. He had a bunch of sort of like 180 and 190 ISOs. He didn't really have like a big power year. And the strikeout rate was definitely kind of oscillating towards getting bigger as he advanced. Usually he got a second chance at the league and did something better with it. So that's why I've remained somewhat hopeful, but he did hit the ball 67 times into play last year and had 0 barrels. And the year before he had 2. So he has 2 barrels with 90 balls in play. And a max EV, he's now had 90 balls in play for his career, and his max EV is subpar. So the quality of his batted balls is not good. And I think, to be fair, we don't even know if he's a starter now. You've got Starlin Castro and Luis Garcia and Josh Harrison. He may not be starting at third right now.
Yeah, you could pretty easily put Castro at third base and play Garcia at second. If Garcia flops, play Harrison. But I can't rule out the possibility of Asdrubal Cabrera or one of those guys, Eduardo Escobar, someone like that, ending up in DC and chewing up a lot of playing time over at third base as well. Really, the big news this week or this episode is your haircut. And unless you're watching the pod, I mean, you got to be watching on YouTube. Just search for Rates and Barrels on YouTube. The video version of our pods is there. No oatmeal graphics yet, but we will get there. You can check out Eno's new haircut. You can check out the
this is my bedhead too. I had to debut with bedhead.
Not bad. It's not bad.
It feels a little bit like, stuck his finger in a light socket, but hey, it has volume. That's what all the kids want these days, isn't it? Volume.
You got volume. I've never really been able to get that. I've got kind of a more tight, clean look, with the scruffy facial hair. So check it out on YouTube. I was
about to say, dude. Yeah, I wouldn't be using tight and clean to describe your looks today, Betty.
The hairline's tight and clean. The face is
there you
not.
Go. The face, not so much.
Very much a podcasting face.
Winter in a very wintry place.
Yeah, it's very cold here, so I'm playing defense on that. If you got questions for us, you can hit us up, ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com.
Should we do a quick beer of the month for last week?
Yeah, actually, let's throw a beer of the month in. You can lead us off.
I'll go first because that was my idea. I have been having so I ordered a case of beer from Cellar Maker, and I didn't even remember that I ordered it. So nice. That's how my life is. And it showed up, and I was like, whoa, Cellar Maker. Oh, yeah, I guess I ordered that. I opened it up, and I bought a quadruple IPA. And it's this beer called Quad Dobus. And I don't even know if a quadruple IPA exists, if it's meaningful as a designation, because basically once you get past a certain level with IPAs, you're just in barley wine. But it's a little bit different with hazies because a 12.8% traditional or West Coast IPA would taste like so much alcohol. I wouldn't like it that much. I mean, Pliny the Younger is coming out right now, and Pliny the Younger has always tasted really hot to me, as they say, just like a lot of alcohol. And it's very sweet, and it's almost like towards like brandy. You start getting that kind of like super sweet, super alcoholic kind of taste. And so I haven't been that fan of triples. I'm not a big fan of barley wines. A quad hazy just tastes like almost as strong as like a double West Coast. It just doesn't, the alcohol doesn't come through, and it's super, super dangerous because A, you just had a beer with 12.8% alcohol. You should go to bed. B, calories come from alcohol.
Yeah.
I just saw that Hop Slam, which is a borderline triple IPA, very strong, clear kind of West Coast style IPA, that Hop Slam, one 12-ounce container has 300 calories in it.
How much do the mini kegs of Hop Slam have? Like the little shelf size kegs, they probably have I don't even 4 pints in them, I would guess, roughly. And they're probably like
1,200 calories. I don't know, dude. Like, what does my 12.8% Quad Dobus have then? I feel like it has to be on the same level. In fact, if it's all alcohol, it has to have more. Does that mean that I just 300? That's like a whole run.
Yeah, I think to be a professional beer drinker, you also have to be a professional runner or cyclist or mountain climber. You have to add something to it. But I'm trying to think back to the best beer I've had over the last month. I'm going to count the New Year's festivities. The Blind Pig from Russian River. Obviously, that's where Pliny comes from. Courtesy of you. Very good beer. I think, I don't know if I like it better than Pliny, but I think the challenge that any brewery has when they have one amazing sort of standout beer, it's probably like being a musician. You've made one great song. You've made one hit. Can you make another? Especially if you keep the style anywhere close to what you did first. It crushes. I love it. It was only 6% ABV, so I didn't have the got to go to bed feeling afterwards, which made it a really good New Year's Eve beer. Would highly recommend. And I think the thing you've said on this show before, Russian River is becoming a lot easier to get than it used to be. When that happens, sometimes you start to lose quality. I've seen some people complaining about Toppling Goliath not being quite as good, now that that's become more widely available. I have not, with my only moderately refined palate, noticed a drop-off, but everything I've had from Russian River is fantastic. And I would add Blind Pig to that list for sure.
Well, I definitely noticed when Ballast Point Sculpin left being a regional beer to being a national beer, I definitely noticed inconsistencies in quality, especially since I think some places were just like leaving them out in the sun or, not for refrigerating them. And so you just weren't getting the same process. But what's really interesting too about Pliny versus Blind Pig is that Blind Pig is actually, they're actually both seminal beers in beer history in that Blind Pig was kind of considered the first double IPA. And now it doesn't say double IPA on the beer, but it's at 6.8%. It was at one point strong for an IPA. And it's also like classic, more bitter profile. It's like a slightly more bitter classic thing. And that was the model for a lot of people's beer for a while. And then Pliny the Elder came out, and Pliny the Elder became the new model because it was sweeter and danker and more of a traditional West Coast IPA. So in some ways, they've built two models that have powered two of the last three beer crazes. Now, some of their hazies aren't amazing, so I wouldn't say that they have the seminal hazy. They didn't catch up with that. But having two models and then also having Consecration, which is one of the best American sours that there is really quite an accomplishment to just, like I say, like sometimes I feel like as an artist, sometimes you have that one good idea and you just keep doing iterations off of that one good idea. Don't think too hard about what that means about my career. But in the case of Russian River, they managed to at least have two, if not three goat type beers.
Yeah, Russian River. I mean, I've started to really put together where am I going to go when COVID travel restrictions are truly over. I mean, Russian River's at or near the top of the breweries that I'd like to visit once I get out to California again at some point, whether that be this summer or fall or winter. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't want to think about that because as happy as the thought of being somewhere else makes me, not really knowing when that's going to happen bums me out. So in the meantime, if you can get your hands on some Russian River, try it. Blind Pig, Pliny, Consecration, lots of great options, as Eno has mentioned on this pod many times before. If you'd like to contact us, you can do that at ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com. On Twitter, he's at Eno Saris. I am at Derek Van Riper. If you want to check out Eno's articles or the updated fantasy baseball rankings, get in before the draft kit launches. You can do that for $3.99 a month to start. Theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels is the way to get that deal. So be sure to hit that up. That is going to wrap things up for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.